The end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. John Locke. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early and for being patient with me as we work out all kind of issues. Yesterday was a disaster. Got going, was just about ready to start the show, and then I started noticing some audio issues, and I realized that the audio was not going through the mic, through the mixer, all the way through to the stream. There was some sort of disconnect. And so I was like, all right, let me see if I can't figure out this quickly. And I was not able to figure it out quickly. So I had to push the show back to today. No worries. Here we are. The show must go on. We're going to talk about several things here. We're going to talk about price gouging here in just a moment. First up, I want to point out what I intended to do was on Mondays talk about the amendments that will be on the Florida ballot. So every Monday, I'm going to talk about one of the amendments. Obviously, this week it has to be Tuesday, but we will be back. And so there are 6 amendments. And so for the next 6 weeks, each week, I will just kind of go over some of the amendments. I will be giving you my opinion on those. Um, that doesn't necessarily reflect the party itself because sometimes members have their own views. So on this show, I'm going to give it to you from my personal perspective. Stepping away, there's not going to be really much difference in what the party puts out and what I have to say. There might be some nuances here and there, but we'll get to that. First up, let's talk about price gouging. It's been all over social media, and um it's actually to the point where I'm not sure people want to understand why price gouging is a good thing. So let's pull up a video here, and this is going to be Kamala Harris discussing in like she's just there's a 1 minute clip of her talking about price gouging, what she's done, and what she's going to do. So let's play that. Let's see here.
As Attorney General in California, I went after companies that illegally increased prices, including wholesalers that inflated the price of prescription medication.
Okay, so let me just pause here. When she says when somebody did something illegally, just keep in mind that you can make anything illegal. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good or a bad thing. Like we could make it illegal to be a good Samaritan. And somebody could say, man, I went after all those people, that were harming people under the guise of trying to protect them or help them. Right. Like you could spin things however you want, and we can create any number of laws for anything. So just because something is illegal doesn't mean that it's morally a good thing, that it's, not permitted, nor does it necessarily mean that it should be illegal, right? Like there's all kind of variations. Something could be a bad thing, but not illegal, right? So I would argue maybe sleeping around, just going out and just finding, somebody to sleep with every single night. I would argue that's not a good thing to do, but I would also argue it doesn't need to be a law against it, right? Like the law shouldn't have any bearing on that. On the other hand, assaulting people, that's morally wrong, and there should be a law against it. So don't be deceived when a politician says, well, I did this thing to stop something that's illegal, because we first have to question, should it have been illegal in the first place?
And companies that conspired with competitors to keep prices of electronics high. I won more than $1 billion for consumers. So believe me, as president, I will go after the bad actors. And I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gauging on food.
Okay, so we do not have a federal ban. There's a website you can go to, and I think there's like 41 states that have, I believe, no ban. No, what is it? There's like 30 some states, I believe, that there is no ban, and there's a handful of states where, um, like they actually have a ban on price gouging, and then I think there's yet a few more states that have something that allow. It can go either way. Like I think they give it to the city to control or something like that. So it's not widespread necessarily across the United States. And I'll try to pull that video up here. I guess I'm trying. I mean the information.
My plan will include new penalties for opportunistic companies that exploit crises and break the rules. And we will support smaller food businesses that are trying to play by the rules and get ahead. We will help the food industry become more competitive because I believe competition is the lifeblood of our economy. More competition means lower prices for you and your families.
Okay, so have you ever been to the grocery store? Like, just go and look at peanut butter, and I want you just when you're there, count all the peanut butter that you can find. There's plenty of competition and plenty of choice. So that's not the problem. And then more than likely, if you live in a relatively good sized city, there are multiple places to go shop, right? Like, so here I can go to like IGA, I can go to Publix, I can go to Walmart, Target, I can go to Costco. If I have a membership, I can go to BJ's. We have a place called BJ's. We have what's the Walmart equivalent of Costco? We have Sam's Club. We have, like there's a bunch of places in Jacksonville that I can go and shop. And then we haven't even talked about all the different like health food type stores. So there are plenty of like when she's suggesting that we need more competition, like how much more? I mean, does she want it to be like the grocery stores to be like Starbucks, where there's seems to be like one on every other block? Like what is it about the current condition that is insufficient? And she doesn't really describe that, but that's okay. I'm actually going to go through and I've got something a little prepared about price gouging. And this actually comes from my episode 17. So, like, I'm on 353 now. So, like, early on, I did an episode on price gouging, and this was during this is during coronavirus. So, this is like back in 2021, maybe it's 2020. I can't remember exactly. So let me walk through it and I'll keep an eye on the comments, and I am kind of reading my old script, but as I was going through it, I was like, really no need to change it. Like it says everything that I want to say. And I think if you were not around, which many of you weren't, if you were not around for episode 17, that's when I was only doing audio and I like scripted the whole thing out as entirely it was a much different time then. Let's put it that way. So I'm gonna go through that because I think that it is extremely useful here, and hopefully you get something out of it. So, all right, so let's go. All right, price gouging comes up in Florida annually. Every hurricane season, we have a state law against price gouging, and even a hotline people can call when they see it. Since my goal is to defend price gouging, let's try to build a foundation for such a defense. I have a favorite question that I like to ask people. I present a scenario where I have a coffee cup. Here we go. Coffee cup right here. It says, I love you more. Okay, this is my coffee cup that I'm using for my illustration. I suggest that I'm offering to sell this coffee cup for $5. Five. So my question then is, why are you willing to give me your $5 for this coffee cup? Like, let's say that you've agreed to it. what would your answer be? Well, almost always people say that either the coffee cup is worth $5 or the coffee cup is worth $5 to them. I think this is incorrect. And I think I can illustrate why. Both of those answers assign a very specific monetary value to the cup, $5, not 4, not 6, specifically 5. The problem one faces is if no one else disagrees, or if no one else agrees, we have a dilemma. There are over 320 million people in the United States. If one person says the coffee cup is worth $5, but everyone else says it's worth 4, who is correct? Well, what if some say 4, others say 5, and yet others say $6? Now, since I disagree with saying the cup is worth $5, I'm not going to even try to answer that question. The reality is, no one person or group of people have a lock on what a given item's value is. But what about the answer, I choose to buy this coffee cup because it's worth $5 to me? That kind of removes everybody else and just, leaves room for them to think the coffee cup is worth more or less, or maybe even the same amount. Slightly different than the last statement because we're specifying value to an individual rather than an item for all individuals. Now, I'm still going to disagree because the response does not account for the differences even with that individual. So consider this scenario. You wake up, and while you're having breakfast and drinking coffee out of your favorite cup, suddenly you drop it on the floor and it breaks, for whatever reason. Now, after cleaning up the mess, you finish breakfast and you open Facebook and you check out the marketplace. And you see me selling this coffee cup for $5. You message me to ask when you can come by and pick it up because you like this cup. I mean, I love you more. It's a nice big cup, right? And so you message me when you can come by and pick it up, and we agree upon a meeting later on this afternoon. Awesome. Your coffee cup will be replaced and ready for breakfast tomorrow morning. Unfortunately, later that day, before the meeting, your car breaks down. You have to have it towed to the shop, and they tell you it's going to cost $1,000 to fix it. As you rearrange your schedule for the day, you realize you're supposed to meet me to buy the cup of coffee or the coffee cup. But with that unexpected $1,000 expense, you decide maybe you might hold off on buying anything, at least until payday. So you message me and you tell me you're sorry, but you have to cancel. You might say, Dale, come on, it's $5. Of course, you still got 5. Well, maybe, or maybe money's tight. Or maybe now that you don't have a car, you're going to have to Uber. So now the $5 cup is going to cost you what, $10, $15 to get there, $10, $15 to get back. Right. So now your cup of coffee, or I keep saying cup of coffee, but now your coffee cup may actually have now, and because of your circumstances, it may cost you more to acquire the coffee cup. So you might say, yeah, I'm just going to wait on that. Now, it's a silly story, of course, but the major elements are have almost certainly happened to everyone. You had intended to buy something, and then some unrelated event caused you to change your mind. So, you see what I mean by this worth $5 to me? Is it still worth $5 to you? Well, we're going to get to that. You might object saying, well, Liberty Dad, I still think it's worth $5. I would just rather have my $5 right now. And now you're on to something. One more illustration, then we'll get to my point. Every year, millions of people expend a great amount of energy to go to their favorite stores and buy any number of various goods. If you're thinking about Black Friday, you're correct. People get up early, stand in long lines, camp out the night before, and even get into altercations with others just to trade their money for something that they've got to have, whatever that is, right? Remember, I think it started with like the Tickle Me Elmo. That's my earliest memory of people just getting crazy about, like, I take my money and give me that item, and if you get in my way, we'll fight, right? Like, this is pretty rough. So once you think about the previous objection that, I would rather have my $5 right now. Black Friday is the opposite. People would rather have an item rather than their money, and they want it right now. Maybe it's a Tickle Me Elmo, maybe it's a PlayStation, it's on sale, and it's gonna, they've cut, I don't know, $75 off the PlayStation, right? And you're like, man, take the rest of my money. Not the rest of it, hopefully, but hey, take my money in exchange for that. Our own actions and the reasons we give for those actions seem to point to a much different reason why we're willing to trade our money for a given item, why we might trade our $5 for a coffee cup. And that reason is we value one more than the other, but that value can change. So in my coffee cup scenario, the morning starts with you wanting the coffee cup more than the $5. But later, due to unforeseen circumstances, um, you determine that you would actually prefer to have your money more than the coffee cup. On Black Friday, people want whatever item they're trying to get more than the amount of money that they have, right? Like that's required for the purchase. In other words, if they want a doll for $25, they want that doll more than they want the $25. You can go further and say Black Friday shows that people often want an item more than they want their money, time, and lack of stress combined. Topic for another day, maybe. When you look at it this way, though, you see a more consistent pattern, whether it's the coffee cup or some other item, whether you think the cup is worth $5 or someone else thinks it's worth $3, the consistent pattern is choosing one thing over another, money over a coffee cup, or or if you make the exchange, the coffee cup over the money, right? So people are wanting one more than the other. That's the catch here. And it's also on display when in negotiating. So if I offer the coffee cup for $5, you might negotiate and you might say, well, will you take four? And I might respond with 450 is the lowest I'll go. And if you say, sorry, I don't want to pay any more than $4, then I know you would rather keep your money than pay more than $4. And you now know I would rather keep the cup rather than sell it for $4. In other words, if 450 is the lowest I'll go, and the highest you'll spend for this coffee cup is $4, then we're not making an agreement now because I would prefer my coffee cup over anything less than $4.50. You would prefer anything over $4, then you would prefer the coffee cup. So we can really look at this about, when we're talking about price gouging, we can start with the foundation of preference. Now I'm going to go into one step further and say you'll never pay what something is worth because that's a meaningless phrase. All you're doing is trading what you have for something that you want, money for a coffee cup, or vice versa. If you're the seller, coffee cup for the money. And no matter what we agree upon, it's always a matter of choice between the options that you have. So that's your first foundation. Okay. Then there's one more. We can discuss the gouging. The exercise we just went through tells us what motivates us to make the exchange, but it doesn't fully tell us the role of price in that exchange. So, in the fewest words, prices are a signal. But what do they signal? They signal where a thing is most needed based on the current level of supply and demand. Prices rise when supply is less available, when demand increases, or both. So, have you ever stopped to notice that during an emergency, only some things rise in price? So, when there's a hurricane here in Florida, which is an annual threat, um, when one does hit, things like water and bread, among other products, suddenly have a higher demand. But things like meat and eggs, and again, some other items, have a lower demand. Drawing on a previous principle, people want water and bread more than their money, but they want their money more than meat and eggs. We all know if a hurricane hits, electricity may go out and the meat and eggs are likely to spoil before we can use them. Water and bread will keep, like, like our car expense earlier, circumstances have changed. However, if stores suddenly were to drop the price of chicken to 1 penny per pound, you would see empty coolers in the meat section. Like people would be willing to take the risk. They would say, wait, based on these circumstances, I would prefer to have the chicken than my 1 penny per pound. Alternatively, if the price of water and bread were raised to say $100 per ounce of water, $100 per slice of bread, instead of empty shelves, we would see more full shelves because people would decide I would prefer to go without and keep my $100. Or maybe they don't go without, they find an alternative. They say, okay, well, what can I have instead? So consider what happens when stores have BOGO and other sales. People buy more. Price impacts behavior. The same holds true during emergency events. The most common time we see that's the most common time we see issues with price gouging. Now, during Hurricane Irma, my wife and I went to Costco prior to the hurricane even making landfall in South Florida. Now, we live in Jacksonville. We're up here in North Florida, Northeast Florida. We arrived about 9:15 a.m. We realized they weren't even open until 10 o'clock. Okay. Parking lot was completely empty. This is a true story, by the way. Parking lot was completely empty, and we left to go run some other errands. Just about an hour later, we returned and the parking lot was full. Like I had trouble finding a spot to park. So I dropped Christy off at the front and said, I'll go and find a parking spot and I'll come on in. So she got out and as she was getting out, I saw a man going by and he had a cart piled high with bottled water, just packages and packages of bottled water. And I started griping about about the time that we got in that the water was going to be sold out, right? So after driving around for another few minutes or so, I found a parking spot and then I went in. And as I walked in, the attendant said they were out of water. Now, mind you, I showed up barely an hour after they opened and they were already out of water. And I had already even gotten to gripe about the man walking in front of me. As I was waiting, my wife was getting out of the car, this man passing by with a cart full of water, right? So here's the point. The demand suddenly increased, but the supply did not. And while people's behavior changed, the price did not because there was no incentive to purchase less. People bought more water because it was the same price as it was the day before. Because they bought more water, stores ran out quicker. And there wasn't any for later. Corner late sorry. I'm reading from my notes here. And there wasn't any for latecomers such as myself. I was barely an hour late. And now imagine somebody who might have been at work that day and unable to get there until early evening. Like imagine how like water would have long been sent out and even some alternatives potentially. So one objection that I frequently get is for someone to ask if I would be okay with the person who has limited money being charged double or even triple or even quadruple the regular amount for a necessity. My answer is always yes. I point out that a pack of water for triple the price is better than no water for the normal price. Remember, I went into Costco and I got zero water that day. Okay. So it didn't matter how much it cost. Like we had no price gouging and I got no water. So it didn't matter. It's also wise to point out such question assumes the regular price was affordable in the first place, right? Like people always assume like, oh, well, you're going to double the price. I don't know. Were people able to buy it enough, the day before the price rose? Like, would they have been in any better situation to buy it? Like when it's kind of a weird conversation when people say like, well, what about somebody who doesn't have a lot of money? Okay, well, if they don't have a lot of money, could they afford it in the first place? Maybe not. Maybe they were drinking tap water, right? In this particular scenario. Um, Furthermore, we must not lose sight of the fact that people's behavior changes based on price. If water suddenly doubles in price or even triples, people are incentivized to purchase less. At Costco, there wasn't any water available for me because people had a greater incentive to buy more and nothing to balance that incentive, which is exactly what a higher price would have done. Now, I want you to remember, I said that prices are a signal. Think of it like this. The price is high. It's a signal saying only buy what you absolutely need. It's a signal. It doesn't force you to do it, but the price is low. It's a signal saying buy as much as you can afford. And if the price is neither high nor low, it's a signal saying buy at your discretion, right? Like that's how we can think of the signal of what price means. This is, and we act on this already. Like you've probably heard somebody who says, I go to the grocery store and I only buy what's on sale, right? Or maybe I only buy BOGO items. So they go to the grocery store and they're already shopping thrifty, right? They're already changing their behavior based on the price. Hey, I don't normally buy this, but it's buy one, get one. Therefore, I'm incentivized to buy it. And I might buy it. I might look and see how many I can get. Oh, it says maximum 3. So maybe I buy 3 and I get 3 free, right? Buy one, get one 3 times. And so that's effectively what's happening when we get this signal. It's changing our behavior. We buy what we absolutely need. We buy as much as we can or at our discretion, right? Depending on the price. Now, no shopper really ever thinks along those lines, but that's the effect. I mean, nobody's walking in like, you know what, if the price is high, that's a signal to me to buy what I absolutely need. Like that, they're not thinking of it necessarily, but that's how they're behaving. Now, sure, there will be people who run out and stock up before the price raises and hopes to profit when it does. And while it feels wrong, it's actually a good thing. We'll come back to that point in just a moment. A price signals not just buyers, but sellers and potential sellers as well. Remember, prices go up when demand goes up, supply goes down, or in a really bad situation, both. Prices tell suppliers, hey, over here, more supply is needed here. So what a price basically tells the supplier. When the price goes up, they're like, hey, that's why people want it. If all of a sudden, like there's a natural disaster, and there was a story about a guy who was coming from like Kentucky or something like that, and he went and purchased a whole bunch of generators because where he was, generators were still at their regular price, and and so he was able to purchase like, I don't know, 10 of them or something like that, and he got a U-Haul, and then he came down to like Louisiana, I think it was, and he was going to sell these generators for more than he purchased them for, because he's got to compensate for his time, and the price is basically a signal to everybody else. If he says, hey, I'm going to sell it to you for exact same price, then, well, he was able to buy a whole bunch. Maybe somebody else would be able to buy a whole bunch as well. But if he says, I'm going to double the price, number one, he's dealing with his cost, because there's a cost for him. He shouldn't do it for free. And then he's also sending a signal, hey, you need to buy what you can afford. I'm sorry, not what you can afford, but you need to buy only what you need. Right? Like that's kind of what the signal is telling him when somebody doubles or triples the price for a generator. But we all think of it in terms of, oh, you're just being greedy. But greed is a good thing because it balances out our behavior. That's what's missing from these conversations when we talk about price gouging, is what is the behavior? Now, sticking with water as our example, if bottled water triples in price, it lets people know in other cities where the water is most needed. So if Jacksonville triples in price, then you can rightly assume that we really need water. Those people in those cities can make haste and bring water supplies. Now, initially, that price will remain high until the water supplies get to a level that can meet the demand. And then they lower. Remember, the price rose as a direct result of the current supply level being unable to meet demand. And price is the most accurate measure of where demand is. Where demand is the greatest, because it tells us where people are actually buying and where supply is actually running low. So this if you can keep it in your mind when you're talking about price gouging, that price is a signal, and it signals something to everyone, and then their behavior changes on it, you will understand why price gouging is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, at this point, another objection is that people are trying to profit off their fellow man during a time of need. So, two things here. Number one, if supplies need brought in it requires additional resources to bring them in. Supplies might need diverted from their original destination. Suppliers might require additional resources, say trucks or what have you, to bring them there. So think about this. In Florida, and if in Jacksonville, we have a huge need for water and generators because a hurricane hit, knocked out a whole bunch of things. Then what ends up happening is everybody's got their normal supply of water in some other city, say maybe Savannah, Georgia. They have their normal supply of water. I mean, that may not be a good example when we're talking about hurricanes, but work with me. Because the hurricane will come up. But anyway, but assume that they still have their same level of water, and they're not expecting the hurricane to come to them. So then somebody might say, "Well, I'm going to buy a bunch of water that we, it's going to lower our supply, but not substantially to the point where it's a problem." So they're going to take that supply, and then they got to get it here, and they got to find a truck, a van, or something, right? Well, all that stuff is being used elsewhere. The supplies are being sold in a different store to people in a different city, so now they're not going to have as much water. The van or whatever you use to transport, maybe that was just maybe it was just sitting there, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was in use, and you say, okay, well, we're going to use this instead of the purpose that it's currently being used for. So you have to make shifts in our supply chain. That's how it works. So this point, suppliers might require additional resources, say trucks or what have you, to bring them there. This is because their resources were already in use. This point needs stressed. Existing resources were already in use. Grocery stores have schedules when shipments are to come, and when those shipments and those shipments are based on non-emergency levels of supply and demand. If a store sells 10 cases of water per week, the next scheduled shipment will account for that. Okay. So that was the first point when we're talking about profiting off our fellow man. Second point is a sharp increase in demand suggests a more immediate need. That immediate need is not necessarily permanent, but it does require a quicker response. And so it's not just profiting off your fellow man, it's also paying for the quickness in which you need to respond. It's also paying for changing what things are being currently used for. So now you can consider price doubling, tripling, or what have you as somewhat a reward for getting supplies so quickly. So if I stop everything that I'm doing, fill up my truck with a bunch of water, drive to another city, I should kind of be considered a hero. And this is what Milton Friedman said. He's like, they're heroes because I saw a need and I met it. And I found a price that was willing to motivate me to meet that need. And again, if the price is too high, people will pick an alternative. So if I say it's $100 per bottle of water, then the likelihood is that they're going to find something else. They're going to be like, you know what, maybe I'll go to the store and I'll just buy some broth. I'll do that. I'll just drink that instead of this $100 water. That's crazy talk, right? Once supply catches up, the reward is no longer available because prices will no longer remain high. Remember, an exchange requires both parties to decide they are better off making the trade. The moment people start buying new supplies of water, their desire for water more than their money will diminish. And when that happens, sellers will start reducing their price because they would rather have what you're willing to pay for than their water. So that person who bought more than they needed in hopes to make money, well, on one hand, yes, they're contributing to the demand. On the other hand, their contribution to the increase in demand is rather low while they are providing the valuable service of ensuring there is water available, even if it ends up being 2, 3, or more times the regular amount. And effectively, when that price raises, it helps ration things out because it makes people choose. Like if I'm wealthy, I'm still there is a price point where I will say that's too much for me to buy this much, right? I might go in with the thinking I'm going to buy 5 cases of water, but if the 5 cases of water are triple the price, then I might say You know what? Maybe two will be good enough. Maybe one will be fine. Now, but what if enough people buy so much water that it runs out quicker? Well, then demand will rise even quicker and people elsewhere will seek to meet that demand. Ultimately, it may backfire on them if others level out supply before they can sell it all. In any case, as horrible as it may seem, realize water comes in even quicker, so people are without for even less amount of time. So the time that we're out actually is reduced. And it's kind of like when there's like a new product to the market, like when flat screen TVs were the new thing, like really the new thing, and you had to be wealthy to get one. They basically paid for the cost, right? So if it might have been $10,000 to buy a flat screen TV, and some wealthy person was able to purchase it. So it's basically supply. It's the same concept, supply and demand. You just don't have an emergency in this particular situation. But what you do is you have the same thing at play. You have somebody paying for all the cost to get that item. And once those costs start getting paid for and then demand starts increasing, and they start getting, and all these things happen, what ends up happening is the price gets lower. And pretty much everybody can afford a flat screen TV now. Most everybody probably has one. Okay. So the same forces that maintain the supply of Doritos acts on water and bread and other necessities during a time of crisis. Price gouging is a compressed version of this. So what you see on a daily basis. So you go in one week and you see that they've got a BOGO on the bananas, and then you go in like the next few days, a few days later, and you see the bananas are not on BOGO, and they're, the prices are fluctuating. This is exactly what price gouging is. It's just a compressed version. And because the need is more immediate, the price sharply increases and the incentive to bring more also goes up, right? So it's compressed and it is a higher price necessary. It's more sharp of an increase because you have more sharp of a change in the demand or the ability to supply the demand. This is what's going on. So it feels counterintuitive because we're discussing things like water and food, but it's really the same mechanism that provides us diamonds and other things that we tend to think of as less necessary to live lives, right? One person has an item that another person wants to make an exchange. Both parties must negotiate the price to a point where each feels better off with the other's item as opposed to their own. It's basically like bartering. If I say I have a wheelbarrow and you say, well, I have, I'm trying to think of something off. I have an old lawnmower. I'm just making stuff up, and we want to make an exchange. It's the same concept. Do I feel better off having your lawnmower than I do having my wheelbarrow? Now I might say, well, I already have a lawnmower, so that's not going to work. And then you might say, okay, well, I have this other item. And so then I have to decide again, do I want this item, whatever that item happens to be, or my wheelbarrow? Right. And I'm going to adjust. Now, if I happen to have a huge project that requires moving a lot of rocks and stones and dirt from one end of my yard to the other, then I may really want my wheelbarrow. And so that may increase or decrease my willingness for some object. So I might say, no, I don't want a lawnmower. I don't want this. Now it's going to have to be something bigger, something that outweighs my need for the wheelbarrow in the first place. But if I have no need for the wheelbarrow at all, zero need, then I might be more flexible and I might be willing to take something smaller, right? It's the same concept in bartering or when we're talking about money. I'm simply making an exchange such that I feel better off and you're willing to make it such that you feel better. And this always happens. So if I go and I say, I'm going to pay $100 for this bottle of water, or, better yet, $100 for this cup, then the issue is for some reason, I want this cup more than $100. But generally that wouldn't happen, right? Unless there's something really, really special about the cup. So hopefully you're starting to understand how this works. And that is the foundation of for arguing price gouging. Now, the biggest challenge is to get past the term because we immediately associate it as something negative, gouging. Nobody wants to be gouged. But once we do and we evaluate what really is happening and why, we see that price gouging is a lot more desirable than it at first feels. Nobody wants to pay double, triple, or more for basic necessities, or really any necessity. We must learn to ask ourselves the most honest question, which is, would we rather pay more or potentially do without? Now, here's a couple of objections that people like to bring up. One, they like to say, well, why don't we just impose a law that says during an emergency, people can only purchase a certain number of supplies? Okay. Well, guess what? You only would have to. So if we have a price gouging law, right? Then that means that people are going to go and they're going to buy more. So then we might add another law that says, well, okay, but you're only allowed to buy two. And so then what other clever thing are people going to come up with? What other response are they going to come up with that we might yet need a third law and a fourth law and a fifth law? Like, that's the problem. Laws are easily undermined. So if you say, well, we have a law that says you can only buy one per person. So I go to Publix, right? And I buy one package of water. And then my wife goes to Publix because she's one person. She goes and she buys one pack of water. Let's say I have a teenager now, and my teenager goes and he buys one pack of water, right? Because we have the price gouging. So then we go to the other store, we go to a different Publix, and we do the same thing, right? And maybe we visit 2, 3, 4 stores. So if we visit 4 stores and there's 3 of us, well, now we have 12 packs of water that we bought for the same price. So you see how people can undermine and get around laws like this? And so the next way would be like, okay, well, now we're going to have to put something into place that, says you can only go to one grocery store and buy it. Maybe you can only go to the grocery store that's closest to your home, something like that. And so you just you end up creating more laws and more laws and more laws when price does all of that for you. Because as a family unit, we're going to decide, do we want to pay the normal price for a package of water or triple or whatever it is? Let's say it's double, right? Do we want to pay it double? Well, it doesn't matter how many stores we go to if they're all double. If they have all increased their prices in response to the demand, then I'm going to be facing the same problem everywhere. Do I want to pay that much? And no amount of there's no way for me to get around it, right? Because like we pay for it as a family unit or we don't. That's it. It's that simple. So then people might say, well, why not just have a cap on how much a price can rise? Well, I want you to remember a price, as we walk through it, indicates the level of need. Price ceilings are generally fairly low and they can be quickly hit. Excuse me. That only means that for someone in a different city, they just need to really know where best to take the resources and how to utilize their time. The longer duration on the cap, the more that we're going to need. But the longer duration, the worse off people are. So it's a matter of trade-offs. We trade a price cap for time, whereas a sharp increase in price is pretty clear. So in other words, do you want this to be resolved quicker or slower? You start meddling in getting interfering with the signals, and people are going to respond based on those signals. And so they respond differently. So what we want a price to go up quickly so that somebody can go, "Oh, I better get that water there really quickly." And yeah, I'm going to make a quick buck or two, but they're also going to get water. And then it's not going to be long before that water goes down. I won't be able to make that quick buck or two. And then once that water, once the supply catches up, then the price has to go down because now we're competing. I want to sell my water. Fred over here wants to sell his water. And we've now brought in so much that people don't demand it nearly as much. So since the demand is going down, I've got to do something to try to get people to still buy my water. So then I might say, okay, well, I'm gonna lower the price. So initially, maybe a packet of water was $5. and then I raised it to $10, and then now supply is kind of caught up, and so people don't need it nearly as much. They feel comfortable, so they're buying it a little bit more slowly. So then I might say, okay, well, how about $9? And then Fred, to compete, might say, well, I don't want us to have all this water. I'd rather have some money rather than no money. So how about $8, right? And so then we can kind of get into this competition. So the market, and this is what we need to tell our politicians and remind them, and they know better. The market handles competition just fine. They just need to stay out of it. So whatever plans that Kamala Harris has, we've already got a mechanism. We don't need your flawed mechanism to intervene. We just don't. We need you to stay the heck out. Just back up. So that's what I've got on price gouging. Let's see here. Let's check out a comment or two. Kamala and Joe are lying when they say they are capitalist and for competition. I agree. Anytime that you interfere in the market, you take that as like a negative against I'm a capitalist or I love competition. No, you don't. You like picking winners and losers. That's what that means. That's what they do. They pick winners and losers. Okay. So let me do an intermission here real quick because I guess I went a little bit longer than I intended, but that's okay. We'll just continue on here. But where's my let me get my intermission here, and I will take a moment, get me a sip of water, and then we'll be back and we'll talk about some ballot amendments. So let's do that.
Who is going to help put things in place that future party members can build upon to make this party better?
Chase has the passion and tenacity that it takes to reach voters of all ages and give us something to hope for.
Chase Oliver has proven that he's willing to put in the work needed.
I have watched him tirelessly work to spread the message of love and liberty.
He just works so damn hard.
I built my presidential campaign on activism and positive aspirational messaging. The results? Featured in numerous media outlets and podcasts. Prominent appearances like the Free and Equal Debate and the Iowa State Fair Soapbox. More than 500 volunteers and a full team of experienced professionals. More donors than any other libertarian presidential candidate. And I'm not just preaching to the libertarian choir. I'm expanding the congregation.
Oklahoma held a libertarian primary.
Chase Oliver won more than 60% of the vote.
This election, 41 million Gen Zers will have the power to vote. They're fed up with the status quo and the negativity the two old parties give them. What they demand is a candidate who resonates with their vision, who grasps their ambitions, and who champions their freedoms. That candidate is me. Let's do this. Let's leave 1% of the dust and run a viable campaign at a time when America is searching for new voices. I'm honored to be the first libertarian candidate for president to ever campaign in all 50 states. People ask me, where do you get the energy to run a 50-state campaign for president? Well, it certainly isn't just me. It's made up of our donors and supporters, the hundreds of volunteers who come out and help, and our amazing staff on the ground. The time is now for our party to invest in reaching out to Generation Z. If we neglect this amazing opportunity to reach out to millions of new voters, we will regret it.
And I'm supporting Chase Oliver.
I choose to support Chase Oliver. I will be supporting Chase Oliver.
And I'm proud to be supporting Chase Oliver for president.
I'm Chase Oliver, a candidate for president, and I approve this message.
How about that? Turn my mic on. Okay, awesome. Back. Let's get into some of this. So what I have up on the screen is a sample ballot. And this is my sample ballot. So I went and I pulled it from the supervisor of elections. And we're just going to kind of walk through a couple things really quickly because I wanted to point this out because I had a friend reach out and they asked me and they were like, hey, DL, who do you recommend for judges? And the problem with judges is that they're nonpartisan, which they should be. They're a judge. And then the other problem is that because they're a judge, there's a major limit on what they can say because they might have a case come before them and their job is to be neutral and decide the law fairly. So then the question becomes like, well, how do we pick them? And to be honest with you, I like what I will do when so here's my strategy. And it doesn't work on this particular case for the ones that we're seeing here with Nancy Cleveland and Ashley Wells Cox, which I'm just using as an example. But for those particular two, there's no incumbent. And I don't believe that either one of them have been a judge before. They've been lawyers, and I think this is their first time to be a judge. I could be wrong on that. Maybe I have my facts incorrect. But the one way that I sometimes will do it is I will go and just type in their name and I will look for news stories. And if I see something where they're in the news for something, a decision that maybe I don't like or something that's kind of radical or whatever, then that gives me a slight hint about their thinking process. Now it's not going to be as good for just somebody who's a lawyer, because unless they happen to have been in a high profile case, but even then, without knowing the arguments that they're making, it's hard to say how they think. So therefore, is that the kind of thinking that I want on the bench? And I'll pull up their websites here. I just want to point this out. Let's see where we go here. So let me pull up their websites here really quickly, and we'll just kind of walk through them so you can see. But I wanted to show you this because they've got the judges. You've got here, there's 4 of them, right? And then down here is the school board. School board's a little bit easier because school board candidates are going out and they can talk about their positions. So you can look and say, hey, in this particular case, Becky Nathanson said this. I like her. Cindy Pearson said this. I like her, or vice versa. I don't like them. I don't like them. Right? You could say it. You could at least go and find out what their positions are, what their plans are for being on the school board. But you can't do that with judges. So it makes it very difficult. And then going to their website really doesn't help much, because here's what's on their website. Let me pull this up here. There we go. Okay, so here's Ashley Cox's website, and you can and there's where's my there we go. So if you scroll down, like, it gives me her education, gives me a little bit of a profile. She's a former assistant state attorney, criminal defense attorney, administrative law, family law. Okay, none of that tells me whether I think you're going to be a good judge. Member of the U.S. Federal District Court, Middle and Northern District of Florida. Okay, doesn't tell me anything. Attorney with Florida's oldest law firm, the Bedell firm. Again, doesn't tell me anything about being a judge, right? And so you just go down here, and none of this information tells me, like, what is her, how do you approach reading the law, right? And that's the kind of information that we want. So I find it very, very difficult. Usually what I try to do is look at, I don't like endorsements. And this is where, like, so here, endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police. Okay, fine. We scroll down here, and this is the other, this is Ashley's opponent, Nancy Cleveland. So if you go down here, she's got a whole ton of endorsements, and it basically looks like the who's who of the Republican Party. Which, if you're a Republican, maybe that works for you. I'm a libertarian. That doesn't work for me. And to be honest with you, even if all these people were libertarians, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that I'm going to vote for them. Although it could bump me into that direction, right? But the point being that it's very, very difficult, and I wish I had a better answer. But honestly, when it comes to judges, the best way that I've found personally is to just to go and research them to the best of your ability and see if there's anything that you find that tells you, I don't really want this person on the bench. But that information is hard to find. Now, if there are judges who have, been judges before, well, then if you really wanted to get crazy, you could go and look up some of their old court cases, and you could see how they argued, or, see what they had to say in those court cases. But that's an awful lot of work. So honestly, I find the appointment of judges, or I'm sorry, the election of judges, to be very, very challenging, and I'm probably right there with you. So, but I wanted to mention that just because a friend of mine reached out and she was like, "Hey, I'm getting ready to vote. What do who do you recommend?" And I was like, "I'm sorry." I was like, "I got no recommendation for you on the judges." So, so there's that. All right. So let's see. Now let's get into the amendments. Okay. So let me put those, there's 6 amendments that are on the ballot here in Florida. So let me put these up on the screen so that you can see them. And let's see, here we are. Boom. There we go. All right. So now here's our 6 amendments. And I'm just going to tell you what they are briefly, but we're going to really focus on the first one. So uh, there's 6 amendments. Amendment 1 changes school board elections from partisan to nonpartisan beginning November 2026 general election and for primary elections, nominating party candidates for the 2026 election. So primary and general election in 2026 is when it starts. Amendment 2 establishes a state constitutional right to hunt and fish. Number 3, legalize marijuana for adults 21 years and older. This makes it legal for recreational purposes as well, because Florida already has medicinal marijuana. Amendment 4, provide a state constitutional right to abortion before fetal viability. That one's going to be fun. Amendment 5, provide for an annual inflation adjustment for the value of the homestead property tax exemption. And number 6, repeal a constitutional provision for providing for public campaign financing for candidates who agree to spending limits. So we're going to talk about all of those over the course of next 6 weeks, but we're going to start with number 1 here, and that's the partisan school board election amendment. So what does it do? A vote yes supports making school board elections partisan beginning on November 26th general election and for primary elections, nominating party candidates for 2026. A no vote opposes making school board elections partisan, thereby maintaining current procedures where school board members are elected in a nonpartisan election. So let's see. Some of the arguments are very interesting, and let's see if I can find some of those. So some of them suggest that it's about transparency. So State Representative Spencer Roach, Republican for 76, he calls it about transparency and having an obligation to give voters as much information about a candidate as possible. I actually agree with that. I want to know as much information about who I'm voting for. So if we were to go back and we were to look at the school board, and this is actually kind of funny because I didn't realize this until, let me see here. Let me see if I can, where are you? Yeah, do I got that? That's what I want. Okay, why are you not? How about that? There we go. Let's get this correct here. So if you look here, and I can maybe make this a little bit bigger so that we can see it. So for school board district 3, we have 4 districts in Jacksonville that have that are up for the 4 seats for the school board that are up. So it's 1, 3, 5, and 7. So I happen to be in district 3. So Rebecca, Becky Nathanson, and Cindy Pearson. So you might think one's a Republican and one's a Democrat. And actually, that's incorrect. Now, you might think that if you're not familiar with the candidates, or you might think that if you're from somewhere outside of Jacksonville. They're both actually Republican. Like, they're registered Republican. Now, this is a nonpartisan race, so they're not running necessarily as Republicans. Okay. So I think that would be useful information to know, because that tells me that for whatever reason, somebody from the Democrat Party has chosen not to run in this district. Why? Why are they not wanting to run? What's going on? Why is there no libertarian? Well, we know the answer for that. We just don't have enough candidates. But why can that happen? Or does this district happen to be extremely red? Right. And that's useful information to know, I think. I think it helps get the right person into the right role. So that's one argument for it. Another argument, let me go back to the switch back over here real quick. Boom, there we go. And I hit the wrong button. It's okay. We will make do. All right. So State Representative Angie Nixon, District 13, she's a Democrat. She opposed it, and she says, I believe this bill, screw that up here. I believe this bill is not about transparency at all. This is about making our school board elections and our school boards more contentious, more like DC, which Republicans honestly always try to oppose. So, yes, I don't know if that's what the bill is about per se. And I don't even know if it's actually about transparency. People can say, well, it's about this. They can say it's about one thing, even though they're really hoping that it will accomplish something else. So, yeah, maybe Mr. Roach does or does not agree that it's actually about transparency. Maybe that's just what he's saying. I don't really know. But I do think that it would give us transparency a little bit. Whether it makes the school boards more contentious, I mean, I think they already are. I mean, we have Moms for Liberty. They rose up specifically to help candidates win school board elections, right? Like that was primarily their purpose. And if you've watched any of the, like here in Florida, here in Jacksonville specifically, several of the candidates who are Republican, they're registered Republican, they have pictures with, um, they have pictures with Ron DeSantis, the governor. And as I just showed you, was it Nancy Cleveland? Yeah, Nancy Cleveland. If you go down here, look, it tells you. Like I told you, like just looking at some of these names, I know they're Republican. I don't know every single person on here, but like Clay Yarborough, Republican. Mike Gay, Republican. Kevin Carrico, Republican. Rory Diamond, Republican. Let's see, Randy White, Republican. Terrence Freeman, Republican. Like half the names I personally know are Republican, right? So we're already there. I don't think that it's going to make it any more contentious, but it will give voters a little bit more knowledge of what's going on. We'll have an idea. We'll be able to look and say, how many Republicans and Democrats are running. So I personally, for me, I'm supporting this. So let's take a look at the ballot measure and see what it says. And so here's what it's going to read on your ballot. Partisan election of members of district school boards. Proposing amendments to the state constitution require members of a district school board to be elected in a partisan election rather than a nonpartisan election, and to specify that the amendment only applies to elections held on or after the November 2026 general election. However, partisan primary elections may occur before 2026 general election for purposes of nominating political party candidates to that office for placement on the 2026 general election ballot. So a whole lot of words to say you're going to see an R or a D next to somebody's name from now on, starting in 2026. like, it's a whole lot of words just to say all of that. Basically what they're saying. All right. So let's see here. Close this window out that I opened by accident there. All right. So let's see. What else is there to know about this? Well, let me put up some images on the screen here. So that was the ballot language. So let me put up the change to the code that we're going to have. So when we do bill reviews or we reveal new amendments or, whatever, these kind of things, if it's underlined, that is new additions. So this is what we've got here. This is what's going to be, this is part of it. Like there's some other changes. They're small and minor. They changed the word from like nonpartisan to partisan, stuff like that. But this is the bigger change. So we can see that they're going to add Article 12 schedule, partisan election of members of district school boards. This section and the amendment to Section 4 of Article 9, requiring members of a district school board to be elected in a partisan election rather than a nonpartisan election, shall take effect upon approval by the electors, except that members of school district boards may not be elected on a partisan basis until the general election held in November 2026. However, partisan primary elections may occur before the general election held on November 3rd, 2026, for purposes of nominating political party candidates to that office for placement on the 2026 general election ballot. Okay, so basically it says the same thing. So I support this. I support the idea of knowing, because to be honest with you, when I first looked at the two candidates that I had, I thought one was a Republican and one was a Democrat. And so then I was like, all right, well, do they fall on the typical talking points for Republicans and Democrats? Well, if they do, and maybe the current talking points about education are not to my liking for one party or the other, then that may help simplify who I want to choose. Now I'm speaking more to independents. We know that there are going to be people who are just straight red and straight blue. And that's fine. Like you vote how you want to vote. And for them, the information they probably already know anyway. Okay. But this is good information for somebody like myself, who's a libertarian, or people who are independents. And mind you, independents are one of the bigger growing groups in the political process right now. So a lot of people are leaving parties. I mean, not enough, but a lot, a substantial number are becoming independents. or maybe even moving to third parties. And so this information is extremely valuable to people like that who might be just as willing to vote for a Republican or a Democrat. And to be honest with you, I've voted for Democrats in the past. I've voted for Republicans in the past, and I've voted for libertarians. You know, so I think that the way that I vote is the way that others might also vote. And so therefore, I look at it and say, I want more information, and I don't see a downside to it. Is it going to get more politically nasty? It might, but it already is. And I wish I it's over there and I can't grab it on my other desk, but I actually have one of the flyers that came for, I think it was Cindy Pearson. It was an anti Cindy Pearson ad, and it said Republican Cindy Pearson believes this, and I was like, Republican, and I was like, because I knew that Becky Nathanson was registered Republican, but I wasn't aware that Cindy Pearson was. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so then now I was like, well, why are there two Republicans running? And there's any number of reasons, but I will tell you this. And if you're big into your party, you might actually appreciate this. It doesn't matter to me. I don't really care. But I found out that when there are two Republicans running in a nonpartisan race, or maybe it might be any race, but it's at least a nonpartisan race. Typically, the Republican Party does not make an endorsement; they let it go. So if you are big on who does my party support, then you'll want to support this as well, because that means it will become a partisan election. And then when there are multiple Republicans that are running or multiple Democrats, if you're a party line person, then you can say, who is my party supporting? That's who I want to support. Now you might say, DL, why would you encourage people? I think that people should vote based on however they choose, good, bad, or indifferent, right? To somebody else, the way that I vote, the decisions that I make may sound foolish. And the way that I vote may make me think that the way you vote, the decisions that you make are also foolish. But I will always fall on the line of more information, not less. So I think in this particular case, more information is better, specifically, and I don't see any downside. There probably is. I mean, there probably, everything is a trade-off, right? Just like our coffee cup and money, you're always basically exchanging one thing for another, right? So there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. But I think in this particular case, the trade-offs are very tolerable, whatever they might be. I haven't seen any that, the ones that I have seen that people acknowledge and say, this is a trade-off that I don't like, such as Angie Nixon saying, well, it's going to make this, more political, more nasty. Well, I think we're already there. I mean, I've seen some of the flyers that have come in, so whatever. But that's where I am on Amendment 1. I'm going to support it. I'm okay with it, mostly just because I want to know more information. And that's it. And then when there's two Republicans running, then I can say why. Why is there two Republicans? What's going on? Is there a difference in philosophy in the Republican Party? Because if the only options that I have are two Republicans, which is the case right now, then I want to find, okay, which person do I feel like represents me? And this gives me a good starting point to say, okay, well, one of you in our particular case, one of you is going to be the more establishment Republican, and one of you is going to be the more grassroots. But if you get like 3 or 4 in there, then that really changes things. And I really got to figure out, like, all right, which one of these has the philosophy that I want, right? And so I can't even, like, even if I wanted to make it about, okay, what are the parties talking about? Well, that still doesn't help me, right? So I think it gives me more of a signal to say, look a little further. I think that's basically what it amounts to. All right, let's see a couple comments here. All right, Keith says political parties should have no privileges as far as the ballot access is concerned, in my opinion. That's fair. As long as they do, though, then I'm going to go with, excuse me, I got to sneeze. Or maybe not. But as long as they do, I'm going to fall on the line of giving us more information. All right, got that sneeze out. Sorry. So that's kind of where I am with this. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you found it informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. Eastern for an informed discussion on politics and culture. I'm going to try to wind these down just a little bit so they're not as long. Today went over So apologies for that. Make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, youtube.libertydad.com. Or if you prefer, you can go to rumble.libertydad.com and you can subscribe there. While you're there, please let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you tomorrow. But for now, I'm out.